part of what she needed to survive. And the proof of that is this one family you mentioned in Los Angeles. They have over 100 vintage prints from Vivian that she gave them. Well, no one in Chicago has that. The Ginsburg family may have had that. But no, she would never share her prints like that with people later in life because she was hanging on to them, and her behavior became progressively worse over time until she was just keeping everything.
It sounds like it was really inconsistent, because I believe you share a story about how the McMillan mother had asked for an extra print of a photo of the daughters in the bathtub, and that wound up being a huge blow up that kind of led to her leaving the family, right? I mean,
well, it actually isn't the reason she left, because it was just the end of the school year, but it definitely created tension in the family. But again, that's right before she went to Chicago. And to me, it was likely the first sign of her hanging on to her photos. All of a sudden, she was becoming difficult, and she didn't want to share them with other people.
I believe you said in the book, you quoted a number of almost 8 tons of material that she was storing in storage lockers around Chicago at the end. Is that right?
Yes, and in fact, that's just in the 5 storage lockers at the place that had that she defaulted and had the auction. There were other storage lockers that the Ginsburg family knew of in addition to that. Now, the reason there was so much stuff, weight, wasn't because of photographic material. It was because of the newspapers. They weighed a lot.
It looks like she was putting clippings into photo albums, but were there just stacks and stacks of newspapers also, or was she kind of curating what she was holding on to?
Well, it was both. She had in her mind, her rationale was, when I have time, I'm going to, read these newspapers. That's why I'm keeping them. There's things I have to look up and know. So she began to fill them into scrapbooks, cut articles that were important to her or she was interested in into scrapbooks, just like she did with some of her photographs. But she also kept all the rest of the newspapers, and she could never have kept up anyway with this scrapbook situation. And so she just kept them all in piles. So she was spending all her disposable income on these storage lockers to house old newspapers, essentially, and her photographic material. But she would have fit that into much smaller space.
At the point that Maloof and Goldstein acquire these materials through, a storage default auction system of whatever kind, she's still alive, right? Do we know whether...
It was the end of her life. It was about, she was alive for about a year and a half, I think.
Do we know whether she was actually aware of enough that she had lost this material and,
I believe she had no idea at all. I mean, at that time, no one knew her, or there was nothing on the internet with John and Jeff or other people there were about 10 people that bought different parts of her archive at the time. No one could really find her. There wasn't information at that point to get in touch with and figure out who she knew and find her. But also, the reason I believe she defaulted on her storage locker was that she didn't realize she defaulted on it. So she had actually been renting the lockers at this particular place for 25 years. And she knew she had to pay a certain amount every year, but she was always late in doing it. So it's not like she didn't know that she would have to pay for this. But in the past, they let her go and, things were worked out and it wasn't a big deal. But at that point in time, the storage locker company was sold to someone else. And they got the papers in order and sent default notices to say, if you don't pay, we're going to auction off your stuff. Well, we don't even know for sure if they had Vivian's current address at the time, but it doesn't even matter. She got default notices all the time and just ignored them. She never thought anything would happen. And I don't even think she thought about it. It wasn't like people were under the impression that she was visiting her storage lockers and looking at her precious photos. And it was such, important material to her. She hardly ever is reported to having visited her storage lockers, except to get one thing or put something in. So it wasn't like that at all. So she probably didn't even know anything was happening and didn't even think about it.
You entered this story having watched the documentary. Since then, you've probably looked at all 140,000 photos and done years of research on her and her family and the people she interacted with. How has your perception of Vivian changed from that first introduction to her to the fuller picture that you have of her today?
Well, that's a good question. I think that, at least for me, and why I'm sort of doing this for other people, is that my goal was really to understand the artist so we could better understand her work. And now that we understand her life story, we can look at her work and understand so much more about why she took what kinds of pictures and how she went about it and what her priorities were and why something caught her eye. And you can see, for instance, that there's so many pictures of children and older women, and those are the people that she was most comfortable with. And you can see she had a great eye for style. But if you look at her, people thought, oh, she was wearing like Salvation Army clothes. But I was able to look at all her clothes that John Maloof has, and they were all designer labels. She wore really fancy clothes and tailored clothes and Liberty of London blouses. So now you can understand her sense of style and quality and on and on and on. And so I think it helps us to really understand her wonderful portfolio and nothing more than her self-portraits, because one of the most interesting things I found was, I set her self-portraits sort of chronologically, and not perfectly, but mostly they really reflect what she was going through in her life. And while we started the project, I think Jeff and John had found like 200 self-portraits. And by the end, I had found 585 in the archive. And when you put them all together, you can see that in New York, she was presenting herself as a young professional photographer. And she almost never did that after she was in New York. And in Chicago, in the beginning, she was presenting herself as a happy nanny that she was. And then when she left the Ginsbergs, even though they didn't know it, she was very upset and depressed inside. And you can see that her self-portraits are very bleak and shadowy. So that, in and of itself, helps you really understand her work and understand that her self-portraits were clearly a means of establishing a presence and exploring her identity and expressing feelings over time, and that was what the role of photography played in her life. So it opens up completely new learning about Vivian.
Well, the book is Vivian Maier Developed. Is it available now, Anne?
Yes, I think it's still on Amazon. It's been sold out in bookstores for a few months, and they can't get another print run, I don't think, until July. So there's some around, but the best place probably to get it at this point is online.
Well, that's good news for you. That it sounds very popular, and so
I hope so.
Probably the last question I have is, what do you think it is that does captivate people so much about Vivian? Is it just this sense of mystery? And, even after all this research, do you think there's still mystery there surrounding who she really was?
I mean, yes, there's always going to be some kind of mystery. I can't completely unlock her, I'm sure. Even after I wrote the book, I found some new things out, which were interesting. But, when she first was discovered worldwide, no one knew that there was a mystery. Her pictures just flew across the web. And it was because of the quality of the work itself. And in my view, it's because she really understood the human condition. And her photographs really displayed something that everyone could relate to. You could feel they were emotional and beautiful, but you could relate to them in your own life. And I think that's really what she offers us in an extraordinary way.
Well, Anne, I really appreciate your time today, and I really respect the obvious amounts of hard work that it took for you to put this book together. And I appreciate you coming on to talk about Vivian Maier, and encourage people to go check out your book, Vivian Maier Developed. Thanks for your time, Anne.
Okay, it's my pleasure. It was great talking to you.
That's all the time we have for this week. You've been listening to Art Sense. You can find the show on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. If you've enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe. And while you're there, please rate the show and leave a quick review. Your feedback is the key to other folks finding us. And if you'd like to see images related to the conversation, read the transcript, and find other bonus features, you can go to cambia.art and click on the podcast tab. If you'd like to reach out to me, you can email me at craig@cambia.art. Thanks for listening.